The quiet man at the table room was full of noise and laughter when Sundar Pichai walked in. Chandeliers above them sparkled like tiny suns, and long tables groaned under the weight of gold plates and crystal glasses. A dozen billionaires sat there already, leaning back in their chairs, talking loudly about their yachts, their islands, their victories. Sundar stood quietly near the door for a moment, holding the edge of his jacket, unsure if anyone even noticed him. One of the men, a broad man with a thick watch and louder voice, waved his hand impatiently. "Ah, he's here, the Google guy. Finally, sit anywhere. Doesn't matter." Sundar smiled faintly and walked to an empty seat at the end of the table. Nobody stood up. Nobody moved their chair to welcome him. Instead, the billionaires resumed their stories. Louder now, they spoke of markets and power and deals, as though Sundar was not even there. For the first 5 minutes, Sundar stayed quiet. He watched the others, his fingers folded neatly on his lap. He listened. He heard one man boast about buying a castle. Another bragged about firing half a company in one day. A woman laughed about how she tricked her competitors. None of them asked Sundar a question, not even his name. Then, the server brought wine. Someone clinked a spoon on a glass. "Gentlemen," the host said, "and lady, let's start. Tonight is about ideas. Whoever has the boldest idea wins our respect. Speak up, impress us." One by one, the billionaires spoke, and their voices filled the room. Each idea sounded louder, bolder, more ruthless than the last. One man said he would turn a whole mountain into a private resort. Another said he planned to patent rainwater so nobody could drink it without paying him. A woman declared she would build her own currency to replace all the others. Sundar stayed quiet. At the far end of the table, he listened as their voices climbed higher. But no one looked his way. Not yet. The man with the thick watch leaned forward and sneered. "Well, Google boy, you're quiet. Don't you have an idea? Or are you just here to take notes for us?" The others laughed. The laughter was sharp and cold, like knives sliding across glass. Sundar lowered his eyes for a moment. He felt heat in his chest, but his face remained calm. And then something unexpected happened. The woman across from him, the one who wanted her own currency, leaned closer. "He's boring," she said, loud enough for everyone to hear. "He doesn't belong here." There it was. The sentence hung in the air like smoke, but Sundar only smiled. A soft, small smile. And he said nothing. The host banged his hand on the table. "Come on, Google boy. Speak. Give us your big idea. Or leave." The room fell silent. Everyone turned to look at him. For the first time, all those billionaire eyes, full of money and hunger and pride, were on him. Sundar set his glass down. His hand didn't shake. He opened his mouth, and he began to tell a story. He spoke softly, so they had to lean closer to hear. "When I was a boy," he said, "I shared a room with my brother, a small room. 2 feet between our beds. We had no phone, no television, no hot water. But I remember one day my father brought home a rotary phone, a simple thing, beige, with a cord. We all gathered around it, as though it was magic." He paused and looked at the billionaires, one by one. "That phone changed how I saw the world. It was not just plastic and wires, it was a doorway." Someone snorted. "What does that have to do with anything?" Sundar smiled at the man who interrupted. "Everything," he replied. But before he could explain, the thick watch man interrupted again. "You're wasting our time," he said, his voice rising. "We don't care about phones or poor boy stories. We care about winning, about crushing our rivals." The others nodded and murmured. Sundar looked down at his hands for a long moment. He could feel his heartbeat steady but strong. Then he looked up, and his eyes were different now, brighter, sharper. He said, "You all speak of winning, but you do not even know what winning means." A hush fell over the table. The air felt heavier. "You build castles, but you destroy the villages around them," Sundar continued, his voice still calm but firmer now. "You cut jobs so you can buy bigger yachts, but you forget the names of the people who worked for you. You want to own the rain, but you never taste it." The room was completely silent now. He took another sip of water and then added, "You think I don't belong here because I stayed quiet, but I was listening. And in your words, I heard only greed and fear. You are afraid of being small. You are afraid of being forgotten. That is why you talk so much." One of the billionaires slammed his fist on the table. "How dare you judge us?" he growled. "You think you're better than us." Sundar looked at him, and his gaze was gentle, but it made the man flinch anyway. "No," Sundar said softly, "I do not think I am better than you. I think you have forgotten who you are." Nobody moved. Nobody spoke. Even the servers in the room froze. Then Sundar leaned back in his chair, folded his hands again, and said, "My idea is simple. Build something that makes life better for someone who can never repay you. That is how you truly win." He stopped talking, and for the first time, the billionaires didn't laugh. But before anyone could respond, a door opened behind them, and a stranger walked in. The man wore a black suit and carried a thin envelope in his hand. He walked straight to Sundar, handed him the envelope, and whispered something in his ear. Sundar's eyes widened. just for a second. Then he stood up, clutching the envelope, and said quietly, "I am sorry. I must go now." The host barked, "Sit down. You can't just leave like that." "What's in the envelope?" Sundar didn't answer. He only gave the room one last look, a look full of something they couldn't quite understand, and walked out the door. Behind him, the billionaires stared at each other, confused and uneasy, because none of them knew what was in that envelope, and none of them expected what was about to happen next. The enveloped hallway outside the grand room was quiet, but Sundar's mind was not. The envelope felt heavier in his hands than it should have been, and as he walked, his footsteps echoed against the marble floor. The door behind him had already closed, shutting off the voices of the billionaires, the laughter, the sneers, the cold pride, as though they belonged to another world. He paused near a window and looked out. The city lights below sparkled, like restless stars, and far away he could see the dark line of the sea. For a moment he just stood there, holding the envelope, breathing slowly. His fingers traced its edges, feeling the weight of the unknown inside. When he finally opened it, his hands moved with surprising care, as if the paper might cut him, as if the words inside might bite. Inside was a single sheet, folded twice. On it, in small, clean handwriting, were just 7 words. "Your family is not safe anymore." He read it again, slower this time. "Your family is not safe anymore." The words didn't change. His throat tightened. He turned the sheet over, but there was nothing else. No signature, no instructions, no explanation. Just those 7 words, sharp and final. He stood there for what felt like an hour, though it could not have been more than a few seconds. The world outside the window blurred. The chandelier light behind him seemed to fade. He could hear his own heartbeat now, louder than anything else. He thought of his wife and children, their faces rising in his mind like a prayer. His daughter's laugh, his son's shy smile, the way his wife always reached for his hand in crowded rooms. Then he thought of the billionaires behind that door, their careless words, their cruel laughter. He folded the sheet back and slipped it into his jacket. He started walking again, faster now. Outside, his car was waiting. The driver, a quiet man in a cap, opened the door and nodded. Sundar climbed in without a word, and the door shut with a soft final click. As they drove through the city streets, Sundar stared out the window but saw nothing. The words repeated in his mind, over and over. "Your family is not safe anymore." He pulled out his phone and opened the encrypted messaging app he used only for emergencies. His fingers hovered above the screen. Then he typed a single sentence. "Is everyone at home safe?" He waited. 5 seconds, 10 seconds, 30, no reply. He typed again. "Reply now. Are you safe?" The screen stayed silent. He clenched the phone so hard, his knuckles turned white. The car stopped at a red light. Outside, people walked past with shopping bags, laughing, alive and unafraid, and he sat there in silence, his mind racing. When the light turned green, he said to the driver, "Take me home now." The driver glanced at him in the mirror, saw the look in his eyes, and simply nodded. As the car sped through the streets, soon, memory took him back, uninvited, to another night many years ago. He was 12 then, sitting on the steps of their small house in Chennai, waiting for his father to come home. It was dark, and the air smelled of smoke and rain. He remembered how his mother had kept looking out the window, worried, how his younger brother had fallen asleep leaning against his shoulder. That night, his father had come home late, carrying nothing but a small parcel and a bruised cheek. He never explained where he'd been or what had happened. That memory rose up now like a ghost, wrapping around him, whispering, "Some things never change." When the car finally stopped in front of his house, Sundar got out before the driver could even open the door. The gate was slightly ajar. He noticed that at once. It was never left open. He ran up the path, his shoes crunching on the gravel. The front door was closed but not locked. He pushed it open. The house was quiet, too quiet. And "Ali," he called, his voice breaking the stillness. Kids, no answer. He stepped inside, scanning the room. Everything looked normal. The sofa where his wife liked to read, the small vase of fresh flowers on the table, the framed photographs on the wall. But there was something wrong. He could feel it. He moved to the kitchen, empty. He climbed the stairs 2 at a time, his breath quickening. The bedroom's empty. In his daughter's room, the curtains fluttered from an open window. The bed was neatly made. Her favorite stuffed animal was sitting exactly in the middle of the pillow. He stood there, staring at it, feeling the silence pressing down on him like a weight. Then he saw it, a note pinned to the window frame. He walked over slowly, afraid of what he might read. The note was written in the same clean, sharp handwriting as the envelope. "You are running out of time." Below that, a single line. "Come alone to where it all began." He stood there, gripping the note, his mind racing. Where it all began. He thought back through all the years, all the cities, all the milestones of his life. And then it hit him. The rotary phone, the house in Chennai. He closed his eyes and saw it clearly. The little house, the 2 narrow beds, the beige phone on the wall. That was where it all began. He opened his eyes and turned, already, moving back toward the door. He didn't know who was behind this. He didn't know what they wanted, but he knew one thing: he would not let fear decide for him. He walked down the stairs, his jaw set, his hands steady now. The driver looked at him from the car, alarmed by the expression on his face. To the airport, Sundar said firmly. I need the next flight to Chennai. The driver hesitated, then nodded. The car pulled away from the house, leaving the lights burning behind them as they drove. Sundar thought about the billionaires at that table, their power, their greed, their empty words. He wondered if one of them was behind this or if it was someone else entirely. But one thing was clear: this was no longer about money, no longer about ideas, no longer about respect or reputation. This was personal now, and deep down, he felt something awakening inside him, something he hadn't felt in years. A quiet fire, a determination he thought he had left behind. He sat back in the seat, staring out at the night sky, and whispered to himself, "You chose the wrong family to threaten." Hours later, at the airport, he boarded the flight alone. No luggage, just the clothes on his back, and the 2 notes in his pocket. The plane lifted off into the darkness, and as the city below shrank away, Sundar closed his eyes and tried to prepare himself for what was waiting in Chennai. He didn't know if he was walking into a trap. He didn't know if he would even see his family again, but he knew he had to go. He had to face whoever was behind this. He had to end it, and as the plane cut through the clouds, he remembered what he had told those billionaires just hours earlier. Build something that makes life better for someone who can never repay you. Now he wondered, would he get the chance to live by his own words? As the plane descended toward the lights of Chennai, Sundar felt the weight of memory and fear and hope all tangled together. The city below looked both familiar and foreign, like a dream he couldn't fully wake from. He closed his eyes and breathed deeply, bracing himself, because what waited for him in that little house, where it all began, would change everything. He did not yet know how. He only knew this: he was running out of time. And someone, somewhere, was waiting for him to arrive. Where it all began. The air in Chennai was thick and heavy when Sundar stepped off the plane. It smelled of rain and earth and something older, something harder to name. He paused on the tarmac for a moment, letting the heat wrap around him, feeling the weight of the place in his bones. Memories stirred at the edges of his mind, faint, stubborn ghosts of a boyhood spent on these streets. He walked through the airport silently, head down, his hands shoved in his pockets. The words from the note still rang in his ears. Come alone to where it all began. He thought of the beige rotary phone, the narrow house, his father's quiet pride, his mother's tired smile. He thought of how far he had come from here, and how quickly it all seemed to fall away, like sand through his fingers. As soon as he read those words, outside, the city pulsed with life. Cars honked and weaved through traffic. Rickshaws zipped by carrying tired workers and laughing children. Vendors called out their prices over the din. It looked almost exactly as he remembered. But there was something else now, to a shadow. Beneath it all, sharp and cold. He flagged down a taxi and gave the driver the address. The driver glanced at him in the mirror, maybe curious, maybe suspicious, then nodded and pulled away from the curb. As they drove, Sundar watched the city pass by, every corner stirring another memory. Here was the park where he and his brother used to play cricket with a taped-up tennis ball. There was the corner shop where he'd saved up to buy his first notebook. The streets were alive with color and noise, but to him they felt muted somehow, as though he was seeing them through glass. Finally, the taxi turned down a narrow lane lined with old houses pressed close together. Laundry hung from balconies, stray dogs dozed in the shade, and children darted between puddles from the recent rain. The car stopped in front of a small, faded house, his old home. The walls were chipped now, the paint a dull gray instead of white. The door looked the same, though with its crooked brass knob and peeling frame. He paid the driver, who lingered just long enough to watch him walk up to the gate before driving off into the night. The gate squealed as he pushed it open. The sound startled a bird from the tree above, sending it flapping into the dark. Sundar stood for a moment on the path, staring at the door, his heart thudding in his chest. He reached out, turned the knob, and stepped inside. The air inside was still, heavy with dust and silence. It smelled of old wood and faintly of the flowers his mother used to keep by the window. Moonlight filtered through the curtains, casting pale stripes across the floor. Nothing seemed to have changed. The same narrow hallway, the same table with a missing corner, even the faint scratch marks on the wall from when he and his brother used to race each other barefoot across the room. But he knew better. Something was different. He took a slow step forward, then another. In the living room, the beige rotary phone still hung on the wall. Sundar stared at it for a long time, his throat tight, his chest heavy. It looked so harmless now, just an old piece of plastic, yet it carried with it all the weight of his journey. All the dreams and struggles and sacrifices that had brought him here. He reached out and touched the receiver. It was cold. Then he noticed it. A single piece of paper, folded neatly, placed under the phone. He picked it up, his fingers trembling just slightly, and unfolded it. You came. Good. Now we begin. Below the words was a map, a crude drawing, with a red circle marking a place he recognized, an abandoned textile mill on the edge of the city. He stood there for a moment, staring at the map, his mind churning. Now we begin. He folded the map, slid it into his pocket, and turned back toward the door. But as he stepped into the hallway, he heard it, a faint sound behind him. Footsteps. He froze. Every muscle in his body went tight. The footsteps came again. Slow, deliberate. He turned his head just enough to see a shadow move in the corner of the room, a tall, thin figure, barely more than a silhouette against the dark wall. Who's there? Sundar's voice was calm, but inside he felt his pulse hammering. The figure didn't answer, it just stood there, watching. Then, with a low creak of the floorboards, it stepped closer into the light. Sundar's breath caught in his throat. It was a boy no older than 14, barefoot, wearing a threadbare shirt and dark trousers. His eyes were sharp and full of something Sundar could not yet name. The boy said nothing at first. Then he spoke, his voice quiet but clear. You shouldn't have come back. Sundar stared at him, confused but unwilling to show it. Why not? He asked evenly. The boy tilted his head, his gaze steady and unblinking. Because they've been waiting for you. Sundar felt a chill creep down his spine. Who? He asked. The boy just shook his head slowly. You'll see, he said. Then he turned and walked down the hall, disappearing into the dark before Sundar could stop him. Sundar stood there, rooted to the spot, listening to the sound of those fading footsteps. Then the house fell silent again. He turned back toward the door, his mind racing. The boy's words hung in the air like smoke. They've been waiting for you. He stepped outside into the night, pulling the map from his pocket and, unfolding it again, his eyes fixed on the red circle, the textile mill. He took a deep breath, letting the air fill his lungs, steadying himself. Whatever waited for him there. He knew he could not turn back now. The drive to the edge of the city took nearly an hour. Sundar rented a small motorbike from a roadside shop and rode through winding streets, past fields and factories and empty lots. The moon hung low and pale in the sky, and the air grew cooler as he left the city behind. Finally, he saw it. The textile mill. It rose up out of the earth like a carcass, its windows shattered, its walls blackened with age, and soot, vines, crept along its edges. The iron gates were rusted and hanging crooked on their hinges. He stopped the bike and climbed off, standing at the edge of the property, staring at the dark building. The silence was different here, thicker, heavier. He pushed the gates open and stepped inside. The ground crunched beneath his feet, broken glass, gravel, old scraps of metal. Inside, the mill was vast and empty. Tall pillars rose to the ceiling. The air smelled of dust and oil and forgotten years. He walked slowly, his footsteps echoing in the cavernous space. Then he saw something. In the center of the floor was a single chair, and in the chair sat a man, tied up, his head hanging forward. Sundar froze, his breath catching. He took a cautious step closer. The man stirred, lifting his head slightly, and Sundar's heart lurched when he saw the face. It was his brother, older now, worn but unmistakable. His eyes opened, and he looked up at Sundar with a faint, bitter smile. You finally made it, he croaked, his voice hoarse. Sundar rushed forward, dropping to his knees, reaching for the ropes. Who did this to you? Are you hurt? What's going on? But his brother shook his head, his eyes glassy and dark. You don't understand, he whispered. You never did. Sundar stopped, his hands hovering over the ropes. What do you mean? His brother's lips curled into something that was almost a smile, but not quite. You think they're after you, but they're not. They're after me and you. You walked right into it. Before Sundar could respond, there was a low metallic click, and suddenly the mill was flooded with light. Dozens of figures stepped out from the shadows. Surrounding him, men in dark clothing, their faces hidden, their movements precise. Sundar straightened slowly, his eyes scanning the circle closing around him. One of the men stepped forward, taller than the others, and spoke in a cold, measured voice. Welcome back, Sundar. Sundar looked at his brother, who only lowered his eyes, refusing to meet his gaze. The man in charge took another step closer, his face still hidden in shadow, and added, now we can finally finish what you started. Circle tightened, the air grew colder, and Sundar felt the weight of the moment press down on him like stone. He stood still, his mind racing, his hands slowly curling into fists at his sides, and then quietly, but clearly, he said the only thing that came to him. What do you want from me? The man's answer was a single word. Everything. The word hung in the air, sharp and final, as the circle closed around him. The impossible choice's silence after that single word. Everything was deafening. It stretched out and filled the cavernous textile mill, mingling with the faint hum of electricity in the air and the soft scrape of boots against the dusty floor. Sundar stood very still, feeling the weight of 24 pairs of eyes fixed on him. Behind him, his brother sat slumped in the chair, his hands still bound, his breathing shallow but steady. Sundar's mind worked quickly, even as his body betrayed nothing. He took in every detail, the way the men stood in a perfect circle, the glint of metal just visible under their jackets, the faint smell of oil and sweat, and something faintly chemical in the air. His heart was beating fast, but he forced his voice to stay even. Everything, he repeated, his eyes fixed on the tall man who had spoken. You'll have to explain what that means. The man stepped forward into the light. His face was finally visible. Sharp angles, dark eyes, a faint scar cutting down from his temple to his cheek. His expression was calm but unreadable. It means exactly what you think it does, the man said, his voice low and precise. Your name, your influence, your access, your silence. And if you refuse, it means everything you care about will burn. The words hung there like smoke. Sundar said nothing at first. He simply looked at his brother, then back at the circle of men, and then finally at the tall man again. You've gone to all this trouble, Sundar said quietly. So why don't you just tell me what you really want? The man's lips curved into something that wasn't quite a smile. He took another step closer, until he was just a few feet away. You still don't see it, do you? The man murmured. You don't realize who brought you here. Sundar's gaze flicked to his brother again. His brother's head was still down. But now Sundar noticed it, the faint tremor in his shoulders, the way he couldn't quite meet Sundar's eyes. Why is he here? Sundar asked, his voice a little sharper now. What does my brother have to do with this? The tall man finally turned his head slightly, glancing at the figure in the chair. He brought you here, the man said simply. He's the reason we found you. Sundar felt the words sink in slowly, cold and heavy. That's not possible, he said. He would never, but even as he said it, his brother lifted his head at last, and Sundar saw the truth in his eyes before the words even came. I'm sorry, his brother said hoarsely. I didn't have a choice. Sundar stared at him, his breath catching, his chest tightening, as though an iron band was wrapped around it. You, Sundar began, but the words faltered. You betrayed me. His brother's eyes glistened, and he finally looked away. They had my son, he whispered. They promised they wouldn't hurt him if I helped them. I thought they just wanted to scare you. Sundar, I didn't know. Sundar closed his eyes for a moment. The ache in his chest was sharp and deep, but when he opened them again, his gaze was steady. And now, he asked, his voice calm, where is your son now? His brother shook his head miserably. I don't know, he admitted. They stopped answering when I asked. They just kept saying to bring you here. The tall man watched this exchange with quiet interest, as though it was nothing more than a performance. When Sundar turned back to him, his own expression was unreadable. So, Sundar said evenly, you used my brother, you used his son, and now you want me to give you everything. The tall man gave a faint nod. Correct, he said, and in return, we may consider letting the boy live. And, perhaps, letting your brother walk away. The word may lingered in the air like poison. Sundar stood perfectly still, his hands loose at his sides, but inside he felt the fire rising again, slow, steady, quiet. He thought of the billionaires at that table, their hollow words, their empty ambitions. He thought of his daughter's laugh, his son's shy smile, his wife's warm hand, and now he thought of his brother, broken, afraid, caught in this web, and of a boy he had never even met who was being used as a pawn in this cruel game. You think I'll say yes, Sundar said softly. You think I'll give you everything, just to save them. The tall man's eyes glittered. You will, he said simply. You're a good man. Good men always break when it matters most. Sundar tilted his head slightly, studying the man. And if I refuse, the man's faint smile widened just a fraction. Then you will watch everything you care about disappear. Starting with him, he nodded toward Sundar's brother. Sundar's jaw tightened, but his voice stayed even. You're very sure of yourself, he said, but there's something you don't understand about me. The tall man raised an eyebrow. And what is that? Sundar's eyes met his, steady and unflinching. I don't break, he said. For a moment. Silence fell again, heavy and charged. Then the tall man gave a quiet chuckle and straightened. Well, see, he said, and he snapped his fingers. Two of the men in the circle moved forward, grabbing Sundar by the arms. Their grip was strong, but he didn't resist. He kept his eyes on the tall man, his expression calm but fierce. Take him, the tall man ordered. Lock him up until he's ready to talk. Leave the brother here. We'll deal with him later. The men began to drag Sundar toward a dark hallway at the edge of the mill. But just as they reached the doorway, something happened. A faint sound, soft at first, but growing louder. At first, Sundar thought it was just the wind. But then he realized it was a phone ringing. Everyone froze. The tall man's eyes narrowed. He turned toward the sound. The ringing came from somewhere deeper in the mill, a shrill, old-fashioned ring, echoing off the walls. Sundar felt his heart jolt in his chest. He knew that sound. It was the sound of the rotary phone. The men holding him glanced at each other, uncertain. Find it, the tall man barked. Now, but Sundar already knew where it was coming from. He jerked suddenly, wrenching himself free from the two men. They lunged to grab him again, but he was already moving, running toward the sound. He ran down a dark corridor, his feet pounding against the cracked concrete. The phone's ringing growing louder and louder. Behind him, Shouts rang out. Footsteps thundered after him. He turned a corner, then another, until at last he saw it there. On a dusty wooden table in the center of an empty room sat the beige rotary phone, its cord coiled like a snake, its dial gleaming faintly in the dim light. It rang again, sharp and insistent. Sundar reached it just as the first of the men burst into the room. Behind him, he snatched up the receiver. "Hello," he said, his voice steady despite the chaos around him. On the other end of the line, a voice, quiet, calm, unfamiliar, spoke just 3 words. "Are you ready?" Before Sundar could respond, the line went dead. He stood there, holding the receiver, the dial tone humming in his ear. Behind him, the tall man stepped into the room, his eyes blazing now, his voice a low growl. "Who was that?" he demanded. "Who's helping you?" But Sundar only set the receiver down slowly, straightened, and turned to face him. There was something in Sundar's eyes now, something the tall man hadn't seen before. A quiet defiance, a calm fury. "You think you control this," Sundar said, softly, "but you don't even understand what you've started." The tall man's jaw tightened. He took a step closer. "And what have we started, Sundar?" Sundar's gaze met his unwavering. "A fire," he said. "A fire," he said, "and you can't put it out." The room went silent. Then, without warning, the lights in the mill flickered violently, and the sound of grinding metal filled the air. One of the men shouted, and then there was a loud crash. From somewhere outside the room, the building shook, as though something massive had struck it. Dust rained down from the ceiling. In a faint, rising roar, like a storm or 1,000 voices began to fill the space. The tall man's eyes widened slightly. Sundar stood perfectly still, watching him. It said just one more thing before the floor beneath them began to crack. "You never should have brought me here." And then, the world seemed to split open. Asterisk, the freethy sound was unlike anything Sundar had ever heard before. Deep, low, rising from the earth itself, a roar that seemed to shake the air out of his lungs. The walls of the mill groaned and cracked as dust cascaded from the ceiling in thick gray clouds. Metal beams above twisted with an awful shriek, and the floor shuddered under his feet as though a live dot around him. The circle of men broke into chaos. Their formation shattered instantly, shouts cutting through the roar as they scrambled to hold their ground. Some ran toward the doors, others drew weapons, but none of them seemed sure what to aim at or who to fight. The tall man, though, he didn't move. He stood in the center of it all, his hands curling into fists at his sides, his eyes blazing with a fury that masked, just barely, something else. Something closer to fear. "What have you done?" he hissed at Sundar, his voice cutting through the noise. "What is this?" But Sundar didn't answer. He just stood there, staring at the man, feeling the faintest trace of a smile on his lips, because he understood now. This was not just the fire they had started. This was the fire he had carried with him all along, a fire he had kept hidden, quiet, until the right moment. And now, it was burning. The floor split open in a jagged line just 2 Sundars left, and a spray of sparks shot upward as a thick iron pipe snapped in 2. Through the dust he saw shadows moving, not the suited men from before, but new figures emerging from the darkness, slipping through cracks in the walls and doorways. They moved with precision, silent but unstoppable, weaving between the panicked guards. Their faces were obscured by scarves or hoods, but Sundar could see enough, the way they moved, the way they worked, and he knew. These were not ordinary men. These were the ones who had called him on the rotary phone. The ones who had waited for this exact moment. They didn't waste time. One by one, they disarmed the guards, knocking weapons to the ground, pinning arms, dragging men into the shadows. Sundar watched as the circle of power around the tall man dissolved in less than a minute. The tall man's fury finally cracked into disbelief. He turned, looking wildly at his crumbling army, then back to Sundar. "Who are they?" he demanded. "Who are you?" Sundar finally spoke, his voice quiet but steady. "You thought I came here alone." The tall man's face hardened. "You're bluffing," he spat. "You couldn't have planned this." No one knew, but Sundar cut him off. "You made a mistake," he said. "You thought you were the only one watching. But the people you overlooked, the people you dismissed, they were watching too, and they don't forget." As if on cue, another shock ran through the floor. Somewhere behind them, a support beam came crashing down with a deafening crash. One of the hooded figures stepped forward and handed Sundar a small earpiece. Without hesitation, he slipped it into his ear. A calm voice crackled to life. "We have your brother and the boy. They're safe. Your call." Sundar, his shoulders relaxed just slightly, though his eyes never left the tall man in front of him. "Safe?" Sundar asked into the air. "Both of them. Both," the voice confirmed. "And waiting for you." Sundar let the smallest sigh escape, relief mingling with the sharp edge of what still had to be done. The tall man seemed to sense the shift. His voice rose, desperate now. "This doesn't change anything," he shouted over the roar of the collapsing building. "You can't touch me. You don't have the nerve." But Sundar took a slow step toward him, his voice still calm, even softer now, but carrying more weight than any shout. You don't understand, Sundar said. You already lost. Not because I'm stronger than you, but because I'm not afraid of you. And for the first time since Sundar walked into the mill, the tall man flinched. Another beam fell behind them, and the hooded figures moved in closer. Sundar could see now how organized they were, how quietly they dismantled the power of the tall man had built. He thought of the billionaires at the round table, all their noise and their pride. He thought of the silence in his childhood home. He thought of the boy in the shadows who had warned him, "They've been waiting for you," and now, he understood what the boy had meant. This wasn't just about Sundar, this was about everyone. The tall man and his kind had hurt, everyone they had overlooked, everyone they had stolen from, silenced, forgotten. And now those people were here. You thought you were untouchable, Sundar said quietly. You thought no one was watching. The tall man glared at him, his voice cracking, as he spat, "Do it, then. Finish it. But when they replace me, and they will, they'll come for you next." Sundar looked at him for a long moment. Then he shook his head. "No," he said softly. "Because we won't forget again." He gestured slightly with his hand. Two of the hooded figures stepped forward and took hold of the tall man's arms, pulling him back into the shadows. He struggled, cursed, but his voice grew smaller, swallowed by the roar of the crumbling mill. Sundar watched until he disappeared completely, then turned back toward the room. The hooded figures nodded to him and began clearing the space, moving with quiet efficiency. Sundar followed them back toward the hall where his brother was still tied to the chair. His brother looked up as he approached, shame etched deep into his face. "I didn't know," he murmured. "I thought they'd kill him if I didn't." But Sundar simply crouched down and untied the ropes, his hands steady, his expression calm. "We'll talk later," he said softly. "Right now we get you both out." He pulled his brother to his feet, slinging an arm under his shoulder, and together they followed the others through the dark corridors of the mill. As they stepped outside, the cool night air hit Sundar's face like a blessing. Ahead of them, parked in the shadows, was a long black van. The boy, the same boy who had appeared in his old house, was waiting at the open door. He gave Sundar a quiet nod and stepped aside. Inside the van, in the back seat, a small boy sat clutching his knees to his chest. When he saw Sundar's brother, his eyes widened, and he scrambled forward, throwing his arms around his father. His brother sank into the seat, burying his face in the boy's hair, whispering something Sundar couldn't hear. Sundar stood outside, for a moment, watching them. Then, he looked up at the city skyline in the distance. The faint glow of dawn was beginning to edge the horizon. He felt tired to his bones, but inside him, the fire still burned, steady and quiet. The boy in the doorway watched him, his dark eyes unreadable. Finally he spoke, his voice soft. "They'll come again, you know." Sundar nodded slowly. "I know," he said. "Are you ready?" The boy asked. Sundar didn't answer right away. He just glanced at the van, where his brother and the boy were still holding each other. Then back at the skyline, where the first hints of sunlight were breaking through the darkness. Finally, he said almost to himself, "I'm not afraid anymore." The boy gave a faint, knowing smile and climbed into the van. But before Sundar could follow, there was a sudden noise behind him, a sharp metallic click. He froze. Then a cold voice spoke from the shadows. "You didn't really think it was over, did you?" Sundar turned his head slowly, and there, standing just beyond the edge of the light, was another figure. But this one was different. Taller, broader, his face completely hidden behind a dark mask. He stepped closer, and Sundar saw something glinting in his hand. Not a gun, but a small black device with a blinking red light. The man tilted his head slightly, his voice calm but full of quiet menace. "You stopped him," the masked man said, "but I am not him, and I've been waiting much longer." He pressed a button on the device, and suddenly, all at once, the ground beneath Sundar's feet began to shake again. The fire was not finished, and neither was the fight. The choice of ground shuddered beneath Sundar's feet, and the faint, blinking red light of the device in the masked man's hand reflected in his eyes. Around them, the air was thick with dust and heat, and the faint scent of smoke began to rise from cracks in the earth. The sound was low at first, like the growl of a distant storm, but it grew louder, filling the silence between them with something primal and alive. The van behind Sundar was still running, its headlights cutting weak paths through the haze. Inside, his brother clung to his son, their eyes wide, their bodies pressed together as though trying to disappear into each other. The boy in the doorway, the one who had appeared to guide him, remained still, watching the scene unfold without moving a muscle. Sundar turned his eyes back to the masked man, who now stood only a few paces away. "You've been waiting," Sundar said slowly, his voice calm despite the tremor of the ground beneath him. "Why? Who are you?" The man's voice came back through the mask, low and deliberate. "I am the one who learned from the shadows. You thought he was the threat. You thought they were the enemy. But they were only the beginning." Sundar tilted his head slightly, studying the man.